Hello everyone, welcome back, those of you who've made it. So today it's going to be part 2 of Bushy Tail, the brush of Everyone Meet Georgia Brown. My lovely assistant, who has just decided that today is the day that she wants to hear a story. Now settle down, Georgia, good girl. Right, so chapter 3, in which Colin is given a hard choice. Colin hardly dared to creep into the living area that morning. He thought that the longer he stayed in his room, the more chance there was that his father would change his mind. He tried wishing very hard that his father would wake up having forgotten the whole thing, but he knew his wishes had come to nothing when he heard his father's voice calling to him. "Colin," Ray called, "breakfast." At first, Colin considered pretending to be asleep, but he knew his father better than that. He didn't make Ray call you twice if he knew what was good for you, so Colin did as he was told. The living area felt colder than normal that morning, and as he came out of his room, Colin noticed two things. One was that his father and mother were sitting with their breakfast in front of them, but were not eating. There was a third place set for Colin. The other thing he noticed was that the tangled plug of grass and twigs which stopped drafts getting into the den had been moved to one side. Sunshine was streaming into the den, but a cold breeze was also blowing in. Colin looked first at his breakfast, which as usual was a large slab of meat, and then at the open hole which led out of the den. Ray could have not made the choice clearer. There would be no discussion, it was one way or the other. "Eat your breakfast," Viv said quietly to Colin, "please." Colin looked directly at his father and said, "No." He went over to his mother and took her paw. "I'm sorry, Mum," he said. "I'm not a little kid anymore. Maybe it's time I made my own way." "Not round here," Ray said, speaking for the first time. "I won't have the foxes round here saying my son doesn't belong. You can do what you want, but you won't do it in these woods." "Then I'll find somewhere else," Colin said, "somewhere I can be who I am." He gently nuzzled his mother's snout, gave his father one more look in case he changed his mind, then left the den. He paused outside and could hear his parents talking inside. "You can't just let him leave," his mother said. "Where will he go?" "He'll come back when he's hungry," Ray replied. "Then we can talk again." "But he's too young to be out on his own." "He's old enough to decide what he wants to eat," Ray said. "Let's just see how far he gets." "Yes," Colin thought crossly. "Let's just see. I'll show you." With that thought still in his mind, he started to walk away from the den. He had no clear idea where he was going. He just knew that he had to get away. Colin walked past the tree where Squish's family was still sleeping in their dray, and the tree next door to it where Whitetip lived. He wondered briefly if he should let them know he was leaving, but decided he didn't want them to try and talk him into staying, so carried on walking. He walked past the set where his friend Brian the badger lived, and under the tree where the wise old owl, Professor Otis, taught the young animals. In the tree, the birds were twittering their early morning messages to each other, and Colin knew that soon they would have something they could really gossip about. He was also starting to feel very hungry. He hadn't eaten the night before and hadn't eaten any breakfast. He looked around on the ground for acorns but couldn't see any. Squish would know where to find some, he thought, but it was too late to go back now. He sniffed at some of the leaves on the bushes nearby. After all, other animals lived quite happily just eating what they found growing on the bushes. He also knew that sometimes his mother added a few leaves to their meals, even though Ray usually left his. But Colin didn't know which leaves were the right ones. He cautiously nibbled at the nearest leaf, but it tasted so unpleasant that he spat it out again. "I wouldn't eat that if I were you," a voice said nearby. "It's bitter." Colin looked round and saw the face of a deer looking nervously at him out of a gap in the hedge. "Yes, I know," Colin replied. "I just found out." "Not your usual sort of thing, is it?" the deer asked. "No," Colin said, "but I don't like the usual sort of thing. I don't like meat. It seems I'm not a usual sort of a fox." "I bet your family's pleased about that," the deer said. "Not really," said Colin. "That's why I'm leaving." "Are you sure you don't eat meat?" the deer asked. "Very sure." "Good, because you're too small to catch me anyway." The deer selected some leaves from a nearby clump of bracken and started chewing. "What's that you're eating?" Colin asked. Bracken. It's really good. You should try some, the deer told him. But you want the new shoots. The older stuff's a bit tough. See at the top, those really curly green bits? Try one of those. Colin looked at the top of the bracken. There were leaves in tight curls clustered together, and they reminded Colin of the way some caterpillars curled up. He bit off one of the shoots and chewed. The shoots were sweet and juicy and really very tasty. Thanks, Colin said to the deer. These are good. No problem, the deer said. Which way are you heading? I'm not sure. That way, I think. He pointed down the path he'd been following before he stopped. Probably as good a way as any, the deer said. You'll have to cross the river, though. Can you swim? I don't know, Colin said. I've never tried. You're about to find out, the deer said with a laugh. Oh, and watch out for pirates. Pirates? Colin said alarmed. What are they? Don't know, the deer said, but I've heard they're all along the riverbank and will steal your pies. But I haven't got any pies, Colin protested. Well, in that case, they'll steal everything else you've got. I haven't got anything at all, Colin argued. Ah, said the deer, but they don't know that, do they? Good luck. With that, he disappeared into the bush and was gone. Colin thought briefly about how kind the deer had been and how its gentle eyes had clouded with fear just because Colin was a fox. He wondered if all animals looked at him like that, even his friends. But then Colin remembered what the deer had said and looked down the path he had chosen nervously. Pirates, he thought. Maybe I was better off staying at home. Chapter 4, in which Colin is missed and we meet the pirates. It was a little later that morning that Squish realised something was not quite right. Most days, while he and Whitetip were out gathering nuts and acorns, they would meet Colin. Colin and their friend Brian the Badger would often hang around and chat while Squish and Whitetip worked. They always joked that Colin and Brian loved to watch them work, but never lifted a paw to help. But on this morning, Brian arrived shuffling and snuffling through the undergrowth as always, but there was no sign of Colin. I haven't seen him, Brian said, when asked. I saw Ray heading off hunting and he didn't look in a very good mood, so I stayed well clear. Ray's never in a good mood, Squish said. I hope Colin's okay. At that moment, Whitetip came scampering down a nearby pine tree and joined them. No Colin today, she asked. We were just talking about him, Squish replied. Brian hasn't seen him. Well, I hope he isn't ill or anything, Brian said. He ate some acorns yesterday, Squish remembered. Maybe they didn't agree with him. Maybe he's fallen down a hole or something, Brian suggested. Honestly, Whitetip exclaimed, you boys are hopeless. It's no good sitting around here wondering. Why don't we do something about it? Oh yes, Brian asked sulkily. What do you suggest, Miss Clever Squirrel? Ask his mother, Whitetip replied simply. And thank you. I am clever, aren't I? Squish and Brian looked at each other. Then without another word, they all headed to Colin's burrow. Colin, meanwhile, was getting more and more nervous the closer he got to the river. He'd never heard of pirates on the river before, but whatever they were, they sounded scary. He also very rarely went near the river. Everyone knew that if you crossed the river you got close to the land of the no-furs, and no one ever really wanted to go there. But Colin had heard tell of other places over the river, secret woods where animals lived happily without being disturbed. Nobody who went to find them ever came back, so they must have been wonderful places. As he arrived at the riverbank, Colin looked around. There didn't seem to be much sign of life. Birds flew about and a pair of bright green dragonflies hovered over the water. Colin leaned over and lapped at the cool water. He hadn't had anything to drink since leaving home and found he was suddenly very thirsty. Further up the river there was a flash of dazzling blue as a kingfisher exploded into the water. Colin looked up and was so fascinated to watch that he didn't hear someone creeping up behind him. I hope you're not thinking of crossing the river without paying, a voice said. Me and Steve would not be happy about that. Not happy at all. Colin gulped. Pirates. No, he stammered without turning round. I was just looking. There might be a charge for looking, the voice said. What do you think, Steve? Is there a charge for looking? I don't know, Johnny, another voice said. No one's asked before. Well, seeing as we rule the riverbank, I think we should make a charge, the first voice said. But I haven't got anything to pay you with, Colin protested. Well then, the first voice said, seeing as you can't pay to cross and you can't pay to look, what are we going to do? What do you think, Steve? I don't know, Johnny. No one's asked that before either. Let him go? Let him go? The first voice sounded really cross now. We can't just let him go. What do you think would happen if we just let him go, eh, Steve? What do you think would happen if word got round that we just let him go? No one would ever pay us again. They'd all go, "Oh, sorry, we can't pay, so just let me go." And we'd have to let them go because we'd done it before. There was a pause. "But Johnny, no one pays us now," the pirate called Steve said finally. "That's not the point," the one called Johnny told him. "Well, it sort of is," Colin interrupted. "You stay out of it," Johnny squeaked. It was probably the squeak which made Colin turn. He really didn't expect pirates to squeak. He looked round expecting to be staring into the face of two fierce animals, but instead found he had to look down. "You're voles," Colin exclaimed. "No, we're not," Johnny said. "We're pirates." "You're voles," Colin told him. "I know voles when I see them." What he saw were two voles, one quite elderly and the other wearing a piece of reed tied round his head for some reason. "We're vole pirates," said Johnny, who had the reed round his head. "I'm Captain Johnny and this is Steve." "How do?" the elderly vole said. "We run this riverbank," Johnny explained. "How can you run a riverbank?" Colin asked. "We just do," Johnny told him. "Just a mention of our name strikes fear into the hearts of all animals. No one crosses us. We're—" "Sorry," Colin interrupted, "but Johnny and Steve don't seem to be very scary names to me." "It's Captain Johnny. It's the captain bit that's scary." "No, it isn't," Colin said. "Anyway, I think there's something you're missing." "Oh?" Johnny asked. "What's that?" "You're voles," Colin said, "and I'm a fox." What do foxes usually eat? Captain Johnny and Steve looked at each other. Then Johnny gestured to Steve with his head, and the pair of them moved away and started talking to each other in low whispers. Colin watched them in amusement. They seemed to be having quite a discussion. Colin hadn't wanted to try and frighten them by pointing out that he was a fox, but sometimes you have to do these things. After a while, the two voles stopped the discussion and came back over to Colin. "Here's the thing," Johnny said. "We've decided that we like you." "Oh, thank you," Colin replied. "And Steve here reminded that we do have a provision for this in our rules. He reminded me that our pirate rules say we can allow foxes that we like free passage across the river, if we want." "Do you want to?" Colin asked. "Well, in this case, yes," Johnny said. "So if you follow the river round that corner over there, there's a shallow bit with some big stones where you can cross." "Oh, thank you," Colin said. "That's very kind of you." "Don't call us kind," Johnny said. "We don't want word getting round that we're kind. It's the rules is all." "Well, I'm very glad Steve remembered them," Colin said. "And it's just as well, because I haven't got any pies." He started to head off in the direction Johnny had pointed out. As he reached the corner, he stopped and looked back. The vole pirates were still watching him go. And when they saw him looking back, they waved. Colin waved back, then turned round the corner and headed off on his travels. As he disappeared round a bend, Steve frowned and turned back to Johnny. "What was that about pies?" he asked. "I don't know," Johnny replied. "Must be a fox thing. They're always thinking about eating." When Squish, Whitetip and Brian drew near to Colin's den, they could see Colin's mother waiting anxiously outside. Brian suddenly spotted something very interesting in a nearby bush and let the squirrels go on ahead without him. As Squish and Whitetip reached Colin's mother, it was very clear that Viv was very upset. "Oh, thank goodness you've come," she said. "Why?" Squish asked. "What's happened?" "It's terrible," Viv said, fighting back tears. "Colin and his dad had a big row and Ray told Colin to go and he did." "That's awful," Whitetip said. "What was the row about?" "That's just it," Viv said. "It was all very silly, really. Colin didn't want his dinner last night and it all got out of paw from there." "Do you know where he's gone?" Whitetip asked. "No," Viv answered. "I wish I did." "How long ago did he leave?" Whitetip wanted to know. "Just after breakfast, not that long. He can't have gone very far." "Don't worry," Squish said. "We'll help. I'm not sure how." "Oh, that's easy," Whitetip said. "We'll go and find Colin and bring him home." And you can find out what happens next if you come back tomorrow for part 3 of A Bushy Tale, The Brush Off. Thank you very much.